The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Reproaction's Act and Learn webinar for the month of April in 2021. Today's topic is a very important one, faith-driven activism. So we'll start out by introducing your host. The first voice you're hearing is Erin Matson. I use she, her pronouns. I am Executive Director and co-founder of Reproaction. I'm based in Arlington, Virginia, and I am Erin to the Max on Twitter.
Hi, and the second voice you're hearing is Nadiah Henson, or Ten. My pronouns are they, them. I am the campaign coordinator here at Reproaction, and I'm based in Greensboro, North Carolina. And you can find me on Twitter at DJDumpThem.
Thank you. So buzz through our agenda. We'll introduce Reproaction, then we'll discuss the history of faith-driven and Quaker activism in the United States. And then we'll go from there to our panel discussion. We're very excited to be joined by two spectacular panelists today. Steph Black from the National Council of Jewish Women and Nadiah Mohajir from Heart Women and Girls. Then we'll do next steps and Q&A. Now, if you have questions for anyone speaking today, just feel free to put them in the questions tab, and I will get to as many as possible at the end. You can do it while the panelists are speaking. You don't have to save them till the end. And if you'd like to live tweet, we encourage you to do so using the hashtag Reproaction. A bit about our organization. Reproaction leads bold action to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We're incredibly proud of our left flank analysis. We are known for our willingness to hold folks on all sides of the issues we work on accountable, whether they're traditionally considered allies or opposition. And we have a deep commitment to nonviolent direct action as one of the tools in our toolbox. And I just want to highlight that I smile as I say that about the commitment to nonviolent direct action, because I believe that's so deeply rooted in traditions of faith-based activism in the United States. And I'm really excited for this discussion that Nadiah has put together today. So with that, I'll pass it over to Ten.
Thank you so much, Erin. So to start off, we're going to speak a bit about the context of faith and social justice causes. So Rep. John Lewis once said in an interview that many people came to the 1960s civil rights movement because people felt like it was an extension of their faith practice. And I included that just to sort of set the tone of where I'm coming from with some of these talking points. And many uprisings and political change projects throughout history come from people working to preserve their religious practices. And to highlight that religions that are not of Christian origins or foundings are often prosecuted or banned. And we can see this in France right now with the government restricting women and girls from wearing hijab. And I want to note that I'm referring to the Christian supremacy in the United States and other places, and that other religions are capable of causing similar kinds of institutional religious suppression and prosecution, and that the frame that I'm working with is of the Christian supremacy I've experienced here in the U.S. Next slide, please. And so with the Quaker tradition, I grew up Quaker, and I learned a lot about the history of the Quaker religion and our community and the organizing that was a key part of what Quaker spirituality is, and the organizing that they did to obtain religious freedom. And because Quakerism was my introduction to social movements, I have found that having a faith practice deeply aligns with my own morals and theories of justice. And when I'm speaking about faith-based activism, I often try to remind myself and others that faith-driven activism doesn't have to use God-centered language. So for me, I find speaking to spirit or the universe, ancestors, or even angels is language that really validates my experience of faith activism crossing paths. And for a long time, I was really unsure of how to combine my commitment to my faith practice and my commitment to justice, and found a middle ground where I would show up to direct action events and simply hold space for people and pray that we stay protected. And I thought that was a fun and interesting way to sort of speak to an example of how I have done that in my personal life. So next slide. And so spirituality and anti-oppression work. For me, believing in more than meets the eye allows me to envision a world where we do not oppress and harm one another. And it reminds me to be grounded not only in the work that keeps our community safe, but in the work that allows me to thrive. I think it's really, I find myself getting trapped in a bit of a loop where I see the world causing harm and see institutions causing harm, and I can't imagine anything outside of that. And it's when I remember that there are opportunities and there are communities that are believing in a world and believing in divine powers that allow us to see beyond that. That really grounds me, and I'm really thankful for that. And last month I spoke about my astrology practice, which paired with my Quaker Foundation really allows for personal world building and helps my efforts to outwardly create better futures for myself and our world. So that is all for me, and I'm going to pass it back to Erin to get our panel started.
Thank you so much, Ten. So next up, I'm very excited to introduce Steph Black, who uses she, her pronouns. Steph is an activist and writer in Washington, D.C. She focuses on expanding access to abortion through fundraising, practical support, clinic escorting, and doula work. You can find Steph's writing all over the place, including Bustle, Rewire News Group, The Progressive, Alma, and more. She is proud to be the communications specialist at the National Council of Jewish Women, where she affirms that abortion access is a Jewish value. She blends her Judaism and activism in her monthly newsletter, The Repro Queen, and she is online at stephblack.blog. Steph, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Oh, Steph, are you there? Are you on mute?
There we go. Sorry. Yep, was muted.
Awesome.
Sorry about that.
All good. So,
hello.
Great.
Okay, sorry about that.
All good. All good. We're so happy you're here. Okay. So let's start with this question. Can you explain what the common perception is of Judaism's stance on abortion and reproductive rights? And if there's a difference between the common perception and what actually is, please explain that as well.
Totally. I'm really glad that this is the first question. I think there's a really common perception of any religion being anti-choice. I think that misperception stems from fundamentalists who are very loud, thinking that they own the narrative of what it means to be a person of faith. Even still, there is a lot of progressive or modern Christian thought that still characterizes abortion as a necessary evil, whereas Judaism, on the other hand, in reality, not only permits abortion, it sometimes requires it. The Torah, which is the Hebrew Bible, teaches us that the life of the pregnant person is more important than that of the fetus. And later rabbis who codified a lot of Jewish law made pretty wide and sweeping exceptions for the people who wanted to have abortions in order for them to be able to have them. We don't quite live in a world where most Jews are asking their rabbis for permission for things like this anymore. However, especially in progressive Jewish spaces, abortion is a normal and common occurrence. Jewish people have abortions at the same rate of any other religious practice. But a really important thing to note is that according to a Pew Research article, Jews are actually the most pro-choice religion in the United States, which is actually something I only learned recently, and I take a lot of pride in. I think that's really indicative of, you know, this different framework that Jews operate in outside of a dominant Christian hegemonic way of thinking.
Thank you. And that's really exciting to hear about the most pro-choice in the US. That's awesome. Specifically, I want to turn it to you a bit. So how does faith show up in your activism? And as we shared with your brief bio, you've got so much of it, not just through your work at National Council of Jewish Women, but with clinic escorting and writing and with abortion funding. So how does faith show up in your activism specifically and your engagement in the reproductive health, rights, and justice movements?
Yeah, it's such a big question. I think for a lot of Jews, this idea that, you know, abortion is okay. We don't, you know, most Jews wouldn't go to their rabbi for permission to have an abortion, but it doesn't really, in a specifically Jewish framework, abortion doesn't have a huge moral imperative beyond what is already stigmatized in society. So most of the stigma you would see from a Jewish person having an abortion is stigma that's like societal based, not necessarily faith-based stigma. However, for me in my work at NCJW, I'm pushing that needle. Abortion is a moral good, and abortion access is a Jewish value. There are so many teachings that I call upon when talking about reproductive justice. One of them is B'Tselem Elohim, which means we're all made in the image of God. We all have a spark of the divine within us, and that is a framework for how we treat each other. You know, if somebody says they need or want an abortion, I recognize that it's my moral imperative to trust their agency, and I do what I can to help them access that. Another value that I call upon and that I really love is this concept of pikuach nefesh, which means the saving of a life. It's pretty much the biggest thing we can do in Judaism is to protect life, the sanctity of life, which may sound a little Christian. It might sound a little anti-abortion. It might sound a little anti-choice. But what that really means is that we are protecting the lives of those who are alive. We are protecting the lives of the pregnant people above those that aren't even born. And that is a really important way that I access, and that a lot of rabbinic leaders and a lot of Jewish leaders sort of say that abortion is necessary. It is part of what it means to be human, in that, you know, the physical and mental, emotional, and financial health of the pregnant person is more important than this maybe potential, possibly future child, and that our job is to protect the pregnant person. And if that means abortion, that means abortion. You know, in that sense, we are what I would call a pro-life religion. I actually would consider myself to be pro-life because I am pro-life, pro the life of the pregnant person. You know, I think those are just some of the values that I hold so dear when I do this work, that leads me to do lots of work where I actually see a lot of connection to different Jewish values. You know, the doulaship, the escorting, the fundraising, the practical support. There's definitely Jewish teaching and Jewish grounding that I call upon for all of those things. You know, abortion funding, for example, it's fund-a-thon season for many abortion funds around the country. Tzedakah is the mitzvah or the commandment that commands us to give righteously or to do righteous giving. So that totally fits into tzedakah. My tzedakah dollars totally go to abortion funds. I will send you to send out to the participants who are listening to this a whole slew of some articles that I've written that really explore the different areas of abortion in Judaism, and including my office place, the National Council of Jewish Women, has the first of its kind toolkit called Abortion and Jewish Values. It's full of all of these teachings and more. It tells us why we should be fighting for fair courts and access to abortion, and why voting is important for abortion rights, and all of the intersections of immigration and healthcare into the abortion movement, and why all of these things are, in fact, classically Jewish values, what I would say. I don't personally find this a radical leap, but I think there are some people who wouldn't necessarily think that off the bat, that fighting for abortion access and doing the work of reproductive justice is necessarily a Jewish value. So I'm very proud. I'm unbelievably proud to be a queer Jewish woman doing the work of reproductive justice and abortion access work. You know, it's an honor, and it feels like I really am participating in a millennia-old legacy of birth and fertility work that Jewish women have been forced to do on our own, for our own protection. You know, Jews historically are almost always in countries and in places where we are under duress, we face state-sanctioned violence. And I think there are just so many parallels between the history of Jewish women doing this work, this reproductive work, and trying to control our own reproductive realities and the challenges we face today.
Steph, can you just say a little more? You really intrigued me there about a long history of Jewish women being forced to do this healthcare work on their own. Can you just share a little more about that? That's really fascinating. I hadn't heard of that before.
Yes, for sure. So Jews are a very persecuted minority as an ethno-religion. And there's this concept dates back even to the story of Exodus. We just finished this story of Passover in the Torah, where we celebrate the Jews' flight from oppression and slavery to freedom. And the story itself is chock full of unbelievably cool women who made this possible, including two midwives named Shifra and Puah, who were commanded by the Pharaoh to kill the firstborn Israelite baby born to any Israelite slave family. And those two midwives, Shifra and Puah, refused. So it was one of the earliest acts of civil disobedience that we see in the Torah. And they refused to kill these children. In a modern example, you have the Angel of Auschwitz, who was an abortion provider, she was a gynecologist. She wasn't an abortion provider. She was in Auschwitz, and instead of allowing Jewish women to give birth, so these children would be experimented on in these concentration camps, she performed abortion on these women. And she said it was something that she would do truly anytime. She understood that, as much as she wanted to see these babies born, that she provided a necessary service to these women to protect them from the horrors of what they would face should they give birth. So I think there's so many really powerful examples of both birth work and abortion work, and the whole spectrum of fertility management that Jewish women have had to do in the face of persecution.
Wow, thank you for that. And I will be sitting with what you just shared for a long time. I really appreciate that. So my last question for you is, for folks in the reproductive movements, what do you want those who are not Jewish to know about or be mindful as we organize together to make everyone more free, regardless of their faith?
Yes, an excellent question. Oops, let me get back to my notes. Sorry about that. I think it's such a good question because this has been on my mind a lot lately. I've been doing a lot more reading books around reproductive justice and the very practical ways that we do reproductive justice. And I've been very frustrated with a common pro-choice quip of, religion is evil, religious people are anti-choice. And, going back to what I said at the beginning, there's this tendency to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater of, all religious people are XYZ. And sure, of course, there are religious people who, what I would consider to be falsely manipulating their religious teaching and their religious values in order to fit their own personal anti-abortion, anti-choice narratives. That's not the case for every religious person. And when you say those things, that you vilify all religious people as fundamentalists, misogynistic, anti-abortion, you send a very clear message to people of other faith traditions that they aren't welcome. I really liked what Ten said at the beginning, when they said, this belief in something I can't see or can't necessarily feel allows me to imagine something bigger and greater. I think that's so spot on, that my religious teaching, I don't need Judaism to be a good person. No, I don't think anyone needs religion in order to be a good person. But to have that framework and that grounding in something so spiritual and so beautiful, it's really poignant and helps me be a better activist. And not only are religious people allies in this movement, we're fighting along with you. I also went into clinic escorting for the first time thinking I would be the only Jewish person there, and that I shouldn't talk about my Judaism because I'd be worried that I wouldn't be accepted or I'd be vilified, and only to discover that there's tons of Jews doing clinic escorting in this area. So it was a really pleasant surprise, and a good message for myself that, Judaism's framework for morality and ethics is so different from that of Christianity. And it's okay to be proud of that. It's okay to be proud that our Jewish framework teaches us something different, something, that abortion is a moral good. And I strongly urge non-Jewish activists and non-minority religious activists to keep that in mind. This movement is big enough for all of us, and it needs all of us.
Wow, this movement is big enough for all of us and it needs all of us is quite a mic drop. So I don't want to interfere with that, but I also want to, it's just a beautiful thought. Thank you. And so necessary in this time. Is there anything else you'd like to share before I pass it over to Nadiah for our next panelist?
Yes, I realized I never named the woman in Auschwitz who I was talking about. Her name is Gisela Pearl. So I just wanted to honor her and name her and bring her spirit into this space as well.
Thank you for that, Gisela Pearl. Thank you, Steph. I want to encourage folks to put any questions you may have for Steph in the questions tab, and we'll get to as many as possible at the end. And with that, I will pass it over back to Ten. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you so much, Steph, for sharing all of those beautiful nuggets of wisdom. So our next panelist is Nadiah Mohajir. Nadiah is a lifelong Chicagoan, Pakistani American Muslim, mother of three, public health professional, reproductive justice activist, and anti-sexual assault advocate. She is the co-founder and executive director for Heart, Women, and Girls. For the last 10 years, she has led organization to provide sexual health education and sexual violence awareness programming and advocacy to thousands of individuals, organizations, and campuses across the country. Heart has broken many cultural barriers, raising awareness and advocating for important issues such as sexual and reproductive health, sexual violence, and media literacy. Heart ultimately aims to dismantle the stigma, silence, and systems that prevent individuals from seeking information, healing, and justice. Thank you so much for being here today, Nadiah.
Thank you so much, Ten and Erin, for having me today.
Awesome. So the first question I have for you is, Heart to Grow envisions a world where all people, including Muslims, are free of sexual violence and thrive in the communities that they live, work, and pray in. What programs and campaigns do you take part in to advance that mission?
Thank you. Yeah, so, a little bit about Heart. We are a national nonprofit that is working at the intersection of reproductive justice and sexual violence prevention in Muslim communities. And, while ultimately our vision is to eradicate sexual violence, we know that we can't do that without also having working with people to have a deep understanding of healthy relationships, sex, and their reproductive rights. And so for the past decade, we've been working alongside Muslim communities to equip them with the language, with the resources, and the choice that they need to make informed decisions about their bodies, sex, and sexual violence. and ultimately become a resource for the communities in which they live, work, and pray in. And, because we are also grounded in a public health and intersectional lens, we want to acknowledge that a lot of this work has to happen at every level of society, right? So that is how we do our work, through our 4 programming arms, which is actually in the acronym of our name. So HEART actually stands for Health Education, Advocacy, Research, and Training. And so our programming can be summed up in that acronym. So health education is, exactly what you think it would be. It's both in-person and virtual education, where people have access to accurate information through interactive and virtual programming, our Instagram, through videos, through Insta Lives, and then also through in-person programming when, we weren't in the middle of a pandemic. That offers people both a way to sort of interact with us in a way that is face-to-face, but also it allows the folks that don't want to be face-to-face, allows them to interact with us in a way that's more anonymous and accessible for them. We also do advocacy, which is where, we offer additional information, support, and referrals to people who reach out to us beyond that, who need additional referrals to move toward healing and justice. And at an institutional level, we also work to reduce the barriers to services and information. And at a structural level, we work to see what we can do to disrupt the systems that have prevented us to live in the world that we want to rebuild the world that we want to live in, basically. So that's what we do in advocacy. Then research, we work with universities and partners to conduct specific research to deepen our understanding of Muslim communities and their needs. And then finally, in training, we offer capacity building and technical assistance to mainstream organizations and Muslim institutions to build their capacity to better serve the sexual and reproductive needs of Muslim communities.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really great to hear such a comprehensive plan, like a direct action vision. I really appreciate that. My second question is, how does your faith inform your community organizing, activism, outreach, and power building?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, first of all, Ten, I actually want to thank you for naming in your reflections the impact of Christian supremacy, and how, I want to just reflect on that a little bit and talk about how, just like any other dominant context in this country, Christian supremacy and colonialism has had an impact as well on Muslims in North America. So, if you look at pre-colonialism and you look at pre-modern times, you'll see the ways that Muslims approach sex and sexuality and reproductive rights and gender. It was very positive, it was very feminist. And the impacts of colonialism and Christian supremacy have sort of introduced notions of shame and stigma and patriarchal interpretations when it comes to matters of sex and sexuality. So one of the ways that I want to give an example of that is, in fact, if you read some of the scholarly work that is done about these issues, you'll see that in pre-modern times, things like abortion was an issue that was actually between the pregnant people and their midwives, and consulting, this notion of consulting religious authority was not actually a common practice as it is now. And so I think that is really important to first and foremost frame the conversation about how Muslims are thinking about sexuality and sex right now in present day. I think it's also important to note 2 other things, and that is that Muslim communities in North America are the most diverse religious minority. So when I say that, I don't just necessarily mean just racial and ethnic diversity, but I also mean geographically, socioeconomically, and even the ways that we practice our faith. There is no one Muslim community, and we're definitely not a monolith. And Islamic law has never been static. So it's always evolved over time and responded to current social and political contexts and societal changes as a way to stay relevant. So for example, advancements in reproductive fertility technology, that necessitated a whole new, set of rules, right? So that it could be dynamic and responsive to the needs of Muslims who were struggling with infertility, and wanted to become parents. And also, I want to name that there's not one single interpretation of most of these issues in Islamic law. So there's at least 4 schools of thought in the dominant schools, Sunni schools, and there's also 3 Shia schools of thought, and there's way more than that as well. And so there's always been a room of difference of opinion. So I say all of this to sort of set the framework to say that we believe that our work is not only aligned with Islam, but is inherently Islamic. And that's because we draw upon a number of core Islamic values to center us in our work. And those are concepts like Rahmah, which is compassion, and Adala, which is this concept of justice and equity. And Quranic verses and calls to actions in the Quran that really ask Muslims and believers to stand up against injustice, even if it's against their own family members, and also to care for the marginalized. And this is really what grounds us in the work that we do every day, and why, oftentimes we get pushback saying that this work is in conflict with our faith tradition, and how we are actually really steadfast in our commitment that it's not just not in conflict, it's actually inherently Islamic.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate the note you made about Christian supremacy in the United States and colonialism impacting the way people can practice. And I'm wondering, a question I have is if you've seen any difficulties navigating, figuring out what Muslim communities need when you're working with them with the impacts of Christian supremacy in your communities.
Yeah, I think, the 2 ways that we've seen it manifest in particular is the conversation around reproductive rights and access to abortion, and the conversation around same-sex intimacy and, gay rights and gay marriage. And I think that is generally where we see the tension happening, and generally the folks that are resistant to those that policy work or that those issues generally have a tendency to align themselves with evangelical Christian thought or right-wing Christian thought. And so that's sort of where we're seeing the parallels. That being said, the common person who doesn't know much about either doesn't actually see that connection in the ways that we do, given that we're immersed in this work. So it's for them, they see it as like, oh, well, this is a religious authority that is saying that, I shouldn't be voting a certain way because this politician, is promoting reproductive rights. And so maybe I should, maybe it's not Islamic for me to vote that way, right? And so that's how they see it. And they don't necessarily know the history of the impact of Christian supremacy and colonialism in the ways that we see it from a systemic lens. And so I think that's an example.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My last question for you right now is, what do you want non-Muslim activists in the reproductive rights and justice space to know or be mindful of as we organize to make everyone more free regardless of their faith?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I was vigorously nodding my head as Steph was talking, because everything that she shared was on point, and so I don't want to feel like I'm just reiterating, but I think it's important to reiterate a lot of what Steph said. And one of the things that we think about a lot at Heart is, you know, historically, religion in this country in particular, but also the dominant narrative around religion is that it is a tool of oppression. And those narratives absolutely exist. You know, too often we have seen religious scripture and religious tradition being misused, misinterpreted to control bodies, sexuality, etc. And particularly that burden falls a lot. It's very gendered, and it falls a lot on people who identify as women and other, you know, marginalized folks. So I want to name that that exists. And I also want to name that there's another narrative that's not as loud, and that is that religion is actually a tool of empowerment, and that it is oftentimes, you know, Muslims use their faith, especially because we know that Islam, I just shared that Islam is actually very wide and diverse and sex positive when it comes to a lot of these issues, to make decisions every day about their bodies and sex and pregnancy and childbirth and all of that. And I think, you know, because the conversation, you know, on the political front has been led predominantly by cis white males who have weaponized religious doctrine and politics to limit access and support for critical reproductive and sexual health care services, you know, we want to name that it's simply untrue that, you know, people who identify with religious or faith communities are inherently opposed to that access. When we continue to reinforce that narrative, it adds to the further invisibilization of people who are in faith communities, particularly Muslims, who very much, you know, believe in access to reproductive and reproductive rights and services, but also people who need it and utilize it every single day of their lives. And so it's really important and critical to like sort of bridge that gap and really provide culturally informed and culturally empowering services that can take into account a person's religious beliefs and lived realities, because oftentimes there's still a framework that they're using to make their decisions. And for providers and activists and, you know, advocates to come in and sort of expect people to compartmentalize their religious identity with, you know, what's happening to them right now, that's not fair, and that's not going to give them a holistic healthcare like sort of experience. And so it's really just important to remember that, you know, as much as there is a narrative of, you know, faith being misused, there's also a narrative of faith being a very big and important and critical tool for people to use as they make their decisions about their reproductive health.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing some of the more personal experiences people are having with their faith in the reproductive choices, sort of like coming into like sort of meeting at a crossroads. I think that's a really important experience that we don't always discuss when we're talking about reproductive rights and justice. And with that, that's all the questions I have for you right now, Nadiah. So thank you so much for your thoughtful responses. I'm going to pass it over to Erin.
Thank you, Nadiah, and thank you, Nadiah. That was amazing. I'm so excited to get to questions. So if folks have questions for Nadiah, for Steph, for Nadiah, or comments you want to make, just throw them in the questions box and we'll get to as many as possible at the end. I also want to share that I just chatted out some resources that Steph provided, a number of different writings that she has done relevant to the conversation that we've been having. So please do check those out. So please plug into Reproaction campaigns. Sign up for alerts at www.reproaction.org on our website. If you do that, you will not miss a thing, including invites to these monthly Act and Learn webinars. We do them every month. They're free and open to the public. And there's no need to get FOMO because you will always get an invite if you sign up. And please do follow us on social media. We are Reproaction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then please save the date for our next Act and Learn webinar, which will be on Wednesday, May 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern, a very important topic. Yikes, abortion restrictions and access to fertility treatment. And with that, I am going to start Q&A, and I'm actually going to take a point of moderator privilege. So Nadiah, when you were speaking, I just shared that our next Act and Learn webinar is going to be about abortion restrictions and the anti-abortion movement and implications for fertility treatment. And at one point in your remarks, you referenced how within Islam, people were grappling with making sure that people who need access to fertility treatment were covered. I'd love to just hear you talk a little more about that. Intrigued knowing that we've got this webinar coming up next month.
Sure. I mean, that was just me acknowledging how Islamic law has needed to be dynamic and change over time, right? So, when Islamic law 1400 years ago was first, sort of established, obviously we didn't have fertility treatments. We didn't have, IVF and IUI and, the opportunity for egg donors and sperm donors and, surrogate mothers and things like that. And so as these opportunities medicine has advanced, what has happened is it has obviously resulted in some really important conversations in Muslim communities, particularly with those who are religious authority and in the, have to think about religious law in terms of which one of these options or which of these options are permissible for couples to utilize in order to become parents if that's what they want to pursue, and which ones are, either in the gray area or impermissible, right? And so that's sort of a very important example to show how Islamic law isn't meant to be static. It's meant to be dynamic as advances are, medical advances in particular continue to happen, because we also see that as a gift from God and as like a mechanism that is allowing for that kind of sort of progress to happen in society. So it should not be, if that progress happens, Muslims should not be left out of that conversation, because it is a very valid way for them to pursue becoming parents as well.
Thank you for that. So we have a question in, and this one is, I will say, I've been thrilled with our panelists, and this conversation has been so enriching. Thank you again to Nadiah for putting it together. As someone who was raised Catholic, and that's a whole conversation for me and therapists who I should pay a lot of money to, given my line of work, this question really resonates to me. How can we make it easier in our religious communities to, quote, come out, unquote, as supportive of abortion? And let's start with Steph, and then I'd love to have Nadiah tackle it next. And then also, let's have Nadiah do it last. Thanks.
This is such a good question, and one that I'm really excited to actually be working on for NCGW. We last summer launched our inaugural program for Rabbis for Repro. We basically put out a call and said, if you are a Jewish clergy member, whether you're a cantor or a rabbi, a synagogue leader, a movement leader, what have you, if you believe that speaking out for reproductive freedom is a Jewish value, please sign. And we have over 1,000 signatories in just about all 50 states, and are really excited that we held our first Repro Shabbat, which correlated to the Torah portion that we read, that really gives us the most basic first framework of where we see abortion as a Jewish value, the right to abortion as something that is morally acceptable in Judaism. And this Repro Shabbat was really important because it came from top down. It was rabbis and synagogue directors and education directors partnering with local repro organizations. It was holding spaces for their congregations to talk about their abortion experiences. It was panels, it was events, it was learning, it was teaching, and we had over 350 events happen nationwide. And what was really important about that for me personally was that it opened up this possibility for congregants to see that this synagogue, this Jewish space is a safe place to talk about my abortion. And what we found was that, especially with the original launching too, it was congregants who were pushing their Jewish leadership to sign the pledge and then to host events. So it's a very tough situation. And we also have rabbis who were like, I'm totally in support of this, join me, add me to your Facebook group, but I can't sign it. I can't sign this pledge because my synagogue is just not there yet, but I'm committed to moving the needle. So I encourage, if you are able and you are lucky to have access to your rabbi or to your faith leader, see if you can start that conversation. I know the National Network of Abortion Funds has some really great conversation starters. I'm sure Reproaction has some really great tips on how to have those hard conversations too. And maybe try broaching that topic with your leadership to say, like, I need a faith-based community in which I can hold and have these experiences without shame and without stigma. And I want this to be a space where I can do that. Can you be my partner in helping move the needle in our congregation? That's my advice.
Thank you so much, Steph. Nadiah?
Yeah, thank you. So if I understood the question, it's how can we make people feel more comfortable being able to come out about their reproductive or their support of reproductive rights? I would say first and foremost, what we are working on at Heart is grounding our communities in compassion and really reclaiming that for what that means. And so the Arabic word for compassion is Rahmah, which also, God is Ar-Rahman, which is the most merciful, the most compassionate. And, we are invited in the Quran to model that kind of compassion for all living things and each other. And so what we did was we have a tool that we came up with, a framework. Again, at Heart, we love acronyms. So you'll see us doing a lot of work with acronyms with the word Rahmah. And the Rahmah framework, the Rahmah principles are a way to respond to someone about any one of their lived experiences, or a disclosure that they're about to give you, or a question that they have about their reproductive health or sexual health or sexual violence that they are feeling nervous or afraid to ask. And so Rahmah means respond by listening, affirm and believe, honor cultural and religious context. M is maintain privacy, and A is assist with providing resources. And I feel like if you are able to channel that kind of compassion, knowing that everyone's lived experience is different and that your lived experience will inform the ways, your biases and the ways that you approach life, and being open to providing non-judgmental support to others to be able to navigate their own lived experiences, that we have noticed has been transformative for the communities that we're working in, to be able to hold space for their loved ones, their families, their friends, their community members. And then the other thing that we have noticed is really transformative is storytelling. And I'm saying storytelling very cautiously because I recognize that we also live in a time where these stories are often sensationalized and exotified and kind of what's the word, exploited. And so I want to recognize that, you know, the storytelling has to be done very carefully. It has to be led by the person who's sharing their story, but that too can be very sort of transformative to being able to normalize being able to talk about these issues and being able to say, hey, this is not an invisible issue. This happened to me, and this is how it felt when I didn't get support, or this is how it felt when I didn't feel like I had access to services that were culturally informed, etc. And I think the more stories we tell, and the more that those stories are community led, the greater people will kind of feel that safety to be able to share their own experiences.
Thank you for that and for underscoring the importance of storytelling. Nadiah, you want to take this one too?
Yeah, I can attempt. So I think for me, coming to this question with like a Quaker lens, Quakerism has been in a lot of ways sort of this like, I'm going to use the phrase like kind of like ugly duckling, black sheep of Christianity, like just kind of a part of this idea of biblical study and believing in Jesus. And there oftentimes is a really big tension in the Quaker spaces that I have been in when we are addressing issues that are of the current moment. So when we're talking about abortion, when we're talking about race, capitalism, immigration, all of these really, really necessary and crucial topics to be speaking about in our faith communities, you're gonna get a mixed bag. And I have found that coming back to the grounding principles of Quakerism for me has been a really helpful way in navigating, making sure my communities know my truth. And so one of the tenets of Quakerism, or the spices, we have an acronym. I cannot remember them all the time, but one of them is that there is that of God within everyone. And I heard that uplifted a little bit from both Nadiah and Steph, that we are all here carrying a light, carrying divine wisdom, and making sure that we are allowing all people to express that. I have found has been a really helpful way for me to navigate kind of coming out to my faith community about my beliefs. And I don't think there's ever going to be a way to do it comfortably. I think sometimes when I've navigated Quaker spaces discussing tough topics, there's a lot of pushback, there's a lot of silence, and Quakers typically worship in silence and use silence as a way to speak with God. And it becomes tough to have tough conversations because people aren't speaking, or people aren't sharing, or because of the nonviolent, pacifist roots of Quakerism, people are really hesitant to push the envelope as to not cause like tension within the group. And I have found that being outspoken and honest in making sure that there are people in my corner, there are people not only in my faith community, but just in my community who will support me through being honest and open and loving in my opinions and beliefs about abortion being healthcare, has been really helpful. And I think it's really powerful to take that step and to push the people who, for me, have seen me grow up, right? And so there has been lots and lots of conversations I've had with people who knew me when I was 4, running around retreats, and I'm now leading workshops for our faith community on why we need to make sure that we are kind of staying current with the times, like making sure that our community is not holding anybody back from living their full truth, their authentic self. And it's been really interesting navigating that.
Thank you so much for that. I think that is a very powerful note that we can end on, unless if there's anything else our panelists would like to share before we close.
No, thank you for having me on. It's been really great to be in conversation with you all today.
Thank you as well. This was just fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists, and a deep thanks to Nadiah Henson, Reproaction Campaign Coordinator, for pulling this together. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take a moment of one more moderator privilege. So Nadiah is a campaign coordinator working on our Bad Faith Medicine campaign, and I'd love, Nadiah, if you just take a moment to explain what that campaign is. And it's so interesting. Just anything else you might have to share about the intersection of that campaign and all we've been talking about today.
Absolutely. So our Bad Faith Medicine campaign is where we are sort of taking anti-abortion advocates to task, and saying, especially when we're looking at things like the not proven, not ethical abortion pill reversal, saying this is not how medicine, this is not good, this is not helpful, this is not ethical, or is it meeting the needs of the people who are seeking care? And I have been thinking a lot about the intersections where this campaign and faith-driven activism kind of overlap. And I have found that there are many and beautiful conversations to have about how our religious or faith-driven ideas affect the ability to make deep, informed, and personal decisions about our healthcare. And I'm looking forward to kind of digging deeper into that as I continue to work on this campaign. And I hope that we can expand on what I wish to expand on what bad faith medicine means beyond looking at abortion pill reversal and the existence of fake clinics, and really digging deeper into what is the religious practices of fake clinics or of people saying that they can provide an abortion pill reversal that is informing this decision. And I think there are so many different avenues and relationships that happen when we kind of like think about what is medicine and also what is religion and what is a faith and how do they connect, because we can't let go of all of our ideas and all of our morals when we enter a space, right? And so people who are practicing medicine or going to figure out how they can find certain reproductive care are also going to be bringing those beliefs with them. And so how can we make sure that that is also comprehensive?
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much for organizing this webinar, Nadiah, and thank you again to our panelists. Steph and Nadiah, this has been a spectacular hour. Appreciate your time, and we hope to see you all next month. Thank you.